Do you have a will? Did you know that most Canadians don't? And there's even a few people who do have a will and it's out of date. So this week, we're going to be speaking to a person who has actually worked very hard to set up a company that democratizes wills so that you don't have any excuses for not having one if you don't already have. This is Make Better Wealth Decisions, a podcast about financial blind spots, decision making, and how the reality of higher rates, global tensions, and tariff instability impact your investments. I'm your host, John DeGuy, a portfolio manager with Design Securities in Toronto. This week, we're speaking with Erin Bury. She is the co-founder and CEO of Willful, a company that has a mandate and a mission to help Canadians everywhere get themselves a will. Erin, how are you today?
I'm good. Thanks, John. And thanks so much for having me.
It's a pleasure having you. I've actually wanted to have you on for a while because it's just so important what you do. And I wanted to begin by perhaps open-endedly asking you a little bit about why you and your husband founded Willful and what your mission and mandate is.
Absolutely. Well, I did not have start a will company on my life bingo card. My background is in journalism and entrepreneurship and marketing. And so we're not estate lawyers by trade. It was really a personal experience that got us interested. My husband's uncle passed away unexpectedly, and he did have a will, but had never discussed end of life planning with his wife of 30 years, didn't, communicate where important paperwork was stored. And it just really highlighted how important it is to have conversations, to put plans in place. And when my husband and I went to get our wills in place, and at the time we were in our early 30s, it was one of those moments where we were quoted thousands of dollars, had to take time off work to go into a lawyer's office. And we thought, there has to be a better way. And so that inspired us to partner with estate lawyers to build a company that essentially moved it online, makes it more affordable and convenient, and helps people who have simple situations to avoid going to a professional and hopefully to inspire them to action. Because as I'm sure you know, the majority of Canadians do not have a will or power of attorney documents.
So this is where I make my confession. As fate would have it, my wife is an estate lawyer. So she helps people write wills. So I'm keenly aware of this, and I've actually updated my will twice. So I'm basically on my third will at this point in my life. And I suspect I will make additional variations going forward as well as circumstances change. I was at a presentation where you were speaking not too long ago, where you said 57% of Canadians do not even have a will, and that about maybe 10% of those who have them have wills that are out of date.
Yeah.
So can you maybe give us a little more detail as to why? Because it strikes me as being the sort of thing that everyone, if you have any assets at all, and if you have dependent children and you need to figure out who's going to be their guardian if you and your spouse pass away in a common disaster, there are just so many things where you absolutely have to have a will. Why are there so many who don't?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm sure, I love the work that your wife and other estate lawyers do. We very much see ourselves as a complement. Our mission is get a will. I don't care how you do it. If you use Willful, great. If you go to an estate lawyer, great. And I'm sure your wife would say probably the same things that I would about the barriers to getting one. They fall into two categories: logistics and psychology. The psychology piece of it is, I don't want to think about death. Who does? Who wants to sit around thinking about death? That's morbid. And people, there's this weird superstition. If I think about death, it's going to somehow hasten it upon me. So I'll just
Yes.
not think about it. And then there's also the psychology piece of urgency, right? Nobody knows the day that we're going to pass away. And so it absolutely does not feel like something you need to get done today. It feels like something that you can put off for tomorrow. If I knew, okay, I'm going to die on January 10th, 2030, I would make sure that I got my will done before then. But because we all don't know, it kind of falls down the to-do list and sits somewhere between clean basement and organized garage, right? It's something that you should do, but there's no urgency to get it done today.
The irony is that January 10th is my wife's birthday. So you just pulled that date out of nowhere.
Well, I very much hope that, yes, I am not making some sort of prediction here, but yeah. And then the other piece is just logistics. Like, listen,
Right.
there are probably a lot of folks that call up your wife and she tells them her price and they say, it's just not tenable for me. So cost can be a factor, whether it's the cost for an online platform like ours or the cost for a lawyer. time, right? I think there's a lot of myths and misconceptions about when, why, and how to get a will. People think that it's like filing your taxes, that it's super complex and you have to have all of your investment statements and paperwork and everything gathered. When in reality, creating a will is three key decisions: who's going to wrap up my life? Who am I going to leave stuff to? Who's going to take care of any dependents? And it can take as little as 15, 20 minutes. So, a lot of what we do, and I'm sure your wife does every day, and estate lawyers everywhere do, is to try to dispel these misconceptions and to try to reinforce that, if you have assets, to your point, of any size, if you have people that love you, that you'd want to be taken care of, you need to prioritize getting this done.
And perhaps we can take a moment to talk about getting a power of attorney while we're at it. I remember about 25 years or so ago, here in Ontario, there was legislation called the Substitute Decisions Act, which was making it a little bit easier for people to get a power of attorney. I think I know but a lot of the listeners might not know. So maybe could you just take a moment to explain what a POA is and why you need two different kinds and just the basics?
Absolutely. Well, the document names vary in each province, so we'll just use the term incapacity planning. So really think of power of attorney as, if will only comes into effect when I die. When I die, I appoint this executor. They're going to have the legal authority to wrap up my life, deal with my funeral and burial plans, etc. Giving someone power of attorney is the same, but you're still alive, but you need someone to make decisions for you because you're ill or injured, or you just went to Florida and you want someone to be able to pay your bills in person while you're away. And so a power of attorney document, there's two different types. One that names someone to make medical decisions for you. If I'm in a coma, do I want you to pull the plug? Really fun stuff like that. And you name someone in a separate document to make decisions for finances. Now, that's often the same person. For example, I've named my husband, Kevin, as my executor to wrap up my estate when I've passed away, but also to act as my decision maker for finances and healthcare. I trust him. He has the most knowledge of our financial situation and of my healthcare wishes. So it's very common for one person to act in all of those roles. But you might have two children, one who's really good with the money and one who you trust to make those medical decisions. So it can absolutely be different people. But I think of power of attorney documents like in car insurance. I hope that I never get in a car accident. I hope I never have to call that insurance company to make a claim, but it's there if I need it. Your will is definitely going to come into effect unless you've discovered the secret to immortality, whereas power of attorney documents are just in case.
Right. And it's ironic because a moment ago you were talking about how people have this psychology about thinking if they think about it that they're going to die. But ironically, and they kick it down the road because they think, well, I'm not going to die anytime soon. Well, oh, really? Like, how do you know you won't be hit by a bus? It seems to me that if you're trying to make better wealth decisions, one of the things that you have to take into account is that you have to acknowledge that you just don't know when your time is up. None of us knows when their time is up. And instead of saying, well, make the decision when I get around to it because I'm young and healthy and blah, blah, blah. Well, I've known lots of people who were healthy one day and they were gone the next, and they didn't see it coming. And so I guess all I'm doing is I'm reinforcing what you're saying is that it's quite urgent. The other thing that I wanted to point out that you've said, and I know this is true, that at Willful, you oftentimes have these little very simple questionnaires to help you to get the juices flowing about what it is you want so that you can think about it to prime the pump, so to speak, and then to help you in going through the exercise of naming an executor or an executrix and deciding who will be the guardian for your young children. So maybe a moment to talk about those questionnaires and the role that they play.
For sure. So if you were to visit a lawyer or a notary, depending on your province, to make your will, they're typically going to ask you a variety of questions, both to get to know your family situation and what decisions you should be making in your will. For example, if I have young children, I should be appointing a guardian. If I don't need to worry about that decision in my will yet. And then they're going to ask you a variety of questions to help you with the decisions in your will. And that's essentially the process that we use at Willful, but we've just brought it online. Now, the key difference if you use a platform like ours versus visiting a lawyer is we're not giving you customized legal advice to your situation. So if you just want legal advice tailored to you, then a platform like Willful is not going to be the right fit. And we're not able to customize things in as much detail or in as much flexibility as a lawyer would be able to do. So, for example, on Willful, you can say, okay, here's who I want to be my executor or co executors. Here's who the backups would be. Here's how I want my assets to be split up and some special gifts that I might want to leave, like jewelry or a cash donation to a charity. And you could even say, here's the guardian for minor children. And if I have minor children, hold the money that I've left for them until age or ages. For me, it's half at 21, half at 25. So those are the types of things that you can do on Willful, the types of things that you may want to visit a lawyer for other than just, I want legal advice, would be things like trust. If you're in a blended family and you
Yeah.
want to use trust to pass on assets efficiently or to protect your children and make sure that things end up with them, things like secondary wills to separate business assets from probate. If you have a child with a disability, there's a specific type of trust you'd want to use to protect their disability benefits. So those are just a few examples. We actually have kind of a warnings page that has all of those scenarios listed. And if you're not sure, you can reach out to our team and we'll be the first to tell you, not a willful thing, go to a lawyer. But I think to your point, it can also just be a way to get those juices flowing, to go through the questions, even if you don't use an online tool to create your will, but to get you thinking about those decisions. That's where people get paralyzed in the process is I get to the question about guardians and I have to sit down and think, oh, geez, who would I want to take care of my kids? Is that the same as my husband or my wife or my partner? Would we choose the same person? Are we arguing over who it would be? And so people often get stuck. And the thing I always try to highlight is make a decision. It doesn't have to be the perfect one. You just told us, John, that you have updated your will twice. You can update your will anytime you'd like. On Willful, it's free. If you use a lawyer, you might have to pay a small fee, but you don't have to make a decision that lasts for the next 60 years. You can make a decision that works for right now, and you can always come back and update it.
It's so nice to know. So the other thing that once the will is in place or once the will has been written, you need to get an affidavit of execution. You need to have someone sign off to say this is in fact legal and I witnessed it and everything else to make it all copacetic in the eyes of the law. So you help people, right? Like you help them to get the will written, and then you also help them get in touch with someone who can sign to make it all legal and binding in good in the eyes of the law.
Yeah, so in 9 out of 10 provinces, everywhere except BC, your will has to be a paper document. Even in 2026, you have to sign it in front of 2 witnesses. Those witnesses don't have to be lawyers or notaries. They can be anyone that isn't a beneficiary of the will. So I can get together with my neighbors or my in-laws in my case. And as long as they sign the document in front of me and I also sign it, then the will is legally valid. In most provinces, BC is excluded. You can also choose to get an affidavit of execution, which is basically a 1-page notarized document that is required at the time of probate. It's basically one of your witnesses filling out a form that says, I saw John sign his will. Yes, I can attest it was him. And the courts will ask for that when probate happens. So we provide guidance on how to do that with partners like Notary Pro, and or you can choose to do that when the person passes away. For example, in my case, I'm not going to get that affidavit because I know I want to update my will in the future. If you're in BC, you can sign your will electronically, you can store it online, and the courts there don't require an affidavit of execution at all.
Well, it's great to see how the provinces have certain things in common. And then it's good to have people like you say, and then here are the differences, so that you're
Yes.
aware of it depending on what you're
Well, and
listening in,
hopefully
right?
in 5 years, every province allows electronic signatures because unfortunately, the estate law has not advanced as quickly as other spaces, right? You can buy a home with a digital signature. You can do any number of other high value transactions. And yet we're still dealing with paper wills, which can get water spilled on them by one of my toddlers, which can be lost or misplaced while moving. And so when you think about what happens when people pass away, often their family members are searching their physical belongings, trying to figure out, did my loved one have a will? Did they work with a lawyer? I have no idea if the lawyer has it sitting in a banker box in their office. And so I'm very passionate about the need to bring it all online, but it moves slowly. And so we'll start with BC and go from there.
It's funny because I've also been known to advocate for certain changes that would be bringing things up to speed and being more hopefully client centric. And I think what you're doing is the same sort of thing. You're democratizing estate planning in a way that a lot of people might not have thought about it because it's just one of those things that they just sort of worry about for later on. Now, I don't usually ask people about the pricing of their offering, but I think for you it really is important because I'm with you. I think I don't really care where you get your will written and executed. Just bloody well get one. It's just critical that you get one if you're an adult at all. So maybe take a moment to talk about what it costs to get a will or a will and a power of attorney or two wills and two powers of attorney with Willful.
Well, I'll talk about all the options. So, if your budget is zero, in most provinces, it is legal to handwrite a will. Now, the challenge with that is you may not know what to write. You may leave certain things out. But if your budget is zero, you can still get a will today and upgrade in the future to another option. So, there's really no excuse not to have one. If you're using an online platform like Willful, with us, it's $129 for just a will. It's 199 Canadian for a will and power of attorney, and it's 349 for two people. So $349 for two sets of documents that cover both the will as well as incapacity planning with the power of attorney documents, which have different names in each province. And that's a one-time fee. So that includes changes to the documents in future instead of paying a fee every time you come back. And it also includes some supporting documents like an estate inventory, which is really helpful for your executor. You can list out where you bank, what accounts you have and subscriptions, digital assets, any debts that you might have. And that can be a really helpful tool for your executor to then have some breadcrumbs when you pass away to start that process. If you work with a lawyer, you may be looking at a higher fee depending on where you live. If a city like Toronto, you're probably going to get higher rates than if you live in a rural area in Nova Scotia. But again, you with a lawyer are going to get that kind of customized legal advice as well as customizations that you may not get with a firm. And if you have complexity to your situation, if you, for example, are in a blended family, then a lot of people would say it's worth the extra money to go get those customizations and that in place because it could save money and headaches down the line. So again, I'm a big fan of getting your will, and there's options at every budget and every kind of situational complexity.
And it's funny because normally if you update your will, that's called a codicil, where you make
Mhm.
an amendment to your will. But with you actually at Willful, you re-execute. So it's the whole new will all over again, and there's no additional fee. Once you pay the initial fee, you can re-execute as often as you want at no additional charge.
Exactly. So the upside of that is there's not a fee. The downside is you do have to kind of go through that signing and witnessing process again. Whereas with a lawyer, I believe with a codicil, you don't have to re-execute it. You're just kind of signing off on that amendment. So, pros and cons for sure. But we do find, I mean, I created my willful will when I had no children. And now as I have two children, I've kind of gone back and made updates and just reprinted it. Every time we go on a trip, it's like, okay, are the wills and the POAs? Am I sending that text message to my mom saying, here's where they are? We just went to Colombia with the entire family, and it was okay. Do my mom and my sister know where the documents are? Have I told them, how to access my passwords? You really do think about these things when you go through those life changes, those life moments. And I think what people tend to like about an online platform is if they think about it on a Saturday night, they can get it done by a Sunday morning flight, which you can't always if you're visiting a professional. I'm assuming your wife does
Right.
not want to be drafting wills at
No.
11 p.m. on a Saturday.
Right. And I think that's actually important what you're talking about with regard to digital assets. So people have dozens of passwords for various things. And if you pass away, good luck in figuring out if you haven't memorialized what the password is for your bank and your trust account and, if you've got a mortgage, whatever else. But just your Facebook page and getting onto your Enbridge account and whatever else. Like you've got dozens. Most people will have at least a dozen different spots where they have an online platform, and it's up to your executor or executrix to clean everything up and pay the final bills and get it all neat and tidy and put away. And haven't helped them if they don't have a way of keeping track of those sorts of things because there's just a lot there. And I think that's one of the things that people don't think about is they think, oh, well, it is the three things that you talked about at the beginning, who's going to look after the children, who's going to get what and so forth. But I think the how to go about it is critical and you have to help the people that you're deputizing to do their job on your behalf.
Absolutely. I mean, often I think people think of being an executor or appointing an executor like they would appoint a bridesmaid in their wedding. It's a popularity contest and it's an honor. And it is an honor. If you're appointed an executor, it means someone saying, I implicitly trust you so much that I trust you to be my voice from beyond the grave. But like being a bridesmaid, I mean, listen, I've been a bridesmaid in a lot of weddings at age 40. I don't want to do it anymore. I just want to attend the wedding and enjoy the open bar. That's like being an executor. It sounds great until you actually, and I have not gone through it yet. I'm sure I will because both sets of our parents are divorced and remarried. That's a lot of estates that we're going to be settling in the future, but it's hundreds of hours of work. And so you can cut down on that by, again, leaving those instructions, documenting your passwords and accounts. I use a great password manager called 1Password, which allows you to share passwords with your spouse or whomever. And you can also do some of this directly on accounts. So with Apple, Google, and I believe Facebook is the only other one, you can actually appoint a legacy contact and say what you would want to happen to the account. Leave my Facebook account open as a memorial account, or shut it down and delete it. But that's only 3 tech providers that have documented ways to pass things on seamlessly or to deal with it after death. Otherwise, to your point, your executor has to contact every single one of those providers and say, Erin died. I'm the executor. Here's a copy of the will. Here's other document, death certificate, whatever else they require. That's so much work. And to your point, a dozen accounts, I probably have 100 to 200 logins, everything from Netflix to online banking to you name it. So it's a lot of work, even if you have put the work into having the legal documents and creating those breadcrumbs for your executor. And so the more you do to help them, to your point, the more favorite relative you'll be from beyond the grave.
It's lovely that you use the word breadcrumbs, like you're, Hansel and Gretel trying to find your
Yes.
way to the gingerbread house. So that's great. All right, let's wrap this up. Erin, the podcast is called Make Better Wealth Decisions. And what I always ask my guests at the end is, what advice would you give to help Canadians make better wealth decisions? It could be anything.
Well, I'm going to shift away from, we've talked a lot about estate planning, but, I'm 40, as I mentioned. And if I think back to when I was 20, what was the advice that I wish I had heeded more? It would be 2 things. First, pay yourself first. Set up those automated, RESP, RRSP savings account contributions, because it's so easy to see the power of compound interest in hindsight. And the best time to invest is 20 years ago. So if you're young and you're listening to this, please set up those automated savings. And the second thing I would say is knowledge is power. We don't learn about these things at our kitchen tables often. We don't learn about them in school. And so I read a book called The Automatic Millionaire when I was very young, and it talked about paying yourself first. And it really, truly changed my life because it helped me prioritize those things. So I would very much encourage, if you're listening to this, you're already trying to do that, but yeah, embed yourself in financial knowledge because it is power and it can really change where you are at 40. And hopefully it will change where I am at 60.
Cool. Erin, I want to thank you for your time today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
This podcast is not to be construed as offering specific investment advice. Please consult a qualified advisor before acting. My books, Stand Up to the Financial Services Industry and Bullshift, are available online. If you'd like to meet to discuss how the topics in this podcast affect you directly, please visit my website.